Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Athena Annual International Conference on Psychology, May 2025 in Athens. My name is Dr. Claudia Simone Dorchin. I'm a philosopher and psychologist from Germany, and my topic for today is trauma, healing, and philosophy. Philosophy, with its claim to grasp the human being as a cognizing and culture-creating being, has developed psychological insights long before empirical psychology was created. Fundamental to this was the preoccupation with the human condition, the conditio humana. The human condition, which entails not only happiness, but also grief, loss, neglect, betrayal, and, of course, trauma. My lecture would like to introduce three different philosophical schools of thought: the Stoics, the Epicureans, and the Nihilists, whose advice on how to cope with trauma fits perfectly with today's scientific insights and even challenges them. We are talking about the definition of trauma research, then the three schools of philosophy I'd like to introduce today: Stoic philosophy and Stoic advice, Epicurean philosophy and Epicurean advice, Nihilist philosophy and Nihilist advice, a comparison of the three schools of thought, and a conclusion. Definition of trauma. Trauma, from Greek trauma, wound, is an emotional response to a terrible event, like an accident, crime, natural disaster, physical or emotional abuse, neglect, experiencing or witnessing violence, death of a loved one, war, and more. American Psychological Association, 2024. Trauma is also a deeply communal problem. We as humans are fundamentally social animals, and trauma profoundly affects people's capacity to get along with others and be a cooperative and enjoyable member of the community. Bessel van der Kolk, 2023. About trauma research. Recent trauma research identifies 5 different types of trauma. Acute trauma, for example, car accident, crash. Chronic trauma, for example, long-lasting disease. Complex trauma, for example, childhood abuse. Relational trauma, for example, childhood neglect. Secondary trauma. This is trauma by witnessing the trauma of others, very common in professions such as social work or therapy. In principle, philosophy could be used historically and systematically for each of the 5 types of trauma known to current research, but here we refer to 3 representative examples. Stoic philosophy was used historically for acute and chronic trauma to console the loss and to process. Epicurean philosophy was used to process chronic and relational trauma in order to expose long-term dangers of social conditioning. Nihilist philosophy saw complex trauma, relational trauma, and secondary trauma as a direct consequence of normopathic societies. 3 schools of thinking in relation to trauma. Stoicism. Stoicism does reframe the traumatic event. Epicureanism. Epicureanism does identify the individual. Epicureanism does disidentify the traumatized individual from social norms. Nihilism. Nihilism does recognize the normopathy of society. let us delve deeper into the three schools of thought and their advice in regards to trauma. Stoic philosophy. The main assumption. The philosophy of the Stoics is considered a rational, cosmologically holistic theory of harmony and ethics that emphasizes the virtues of apatheia, equanimity, ataraxia, peace of mind, and eudaimonia, bliss. The four Stoic virtues, also called Socratic and cardinal virtues, are courage, wisdom, temperance, and justice. The Stoics also had maxims such as remember you are mortal, be surprised at nothing, or be watchful at beginnings. There's one famous example for Stoic philosophy in regards to trauma, dealing with grief and loss. Meister Eckhart of Hochheim, the philosopher, mystic, and theology professor, he advised the traumatized Queen Agnes of Hungary, who had to hide from her enemies in a monastery after the assassination of her husband. He offered the Queen Stoic philosophy as advice on how to navigate through misfortune and injustice and find ataraxia, peace of mind. His advice was, imagine yourself before and after the loss and see how loss does not define you. See how prosperous you were before the loss, and that loss is actually a privilege. Then finally, nothing existentially belongs to you. You have to return everything to your Creator. Now let us see what Epicurean philosophy has to offer, as a philosophy and in regards to dealing with trauma. The main assumption, Epicureanism is a hedonistic philosophy based on atomistic materialistic principles. Eudaimonia is interpreted as pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure as a general human motivation that flows through our entire natural and cultural life. The outlook of Epicurean philosophy, fearlessness in the face of gods or demons or adverse after-death experiences through knowledge of the laws of nature. This would lead to a greater peace of mind. Happiness ultimately is not unrestrained lust for pleasure, but freedom from pain and autarky. How do Epicurean philosophers deal with trauma or with discrimination and societal pressure? There's one famous example, Epicurean philosopher Anne de L'Enclos. She advised the young nobleman Sévigné on his way into court society. With the help of Epicurean philosophy, she advised him to navigate between pure sensual excess and uptight prudery, and to recognize the masquerade of society. The advice of Anne de L'Enclos towards dealing with trauma caused by discrimination and societal pressure is the following. Don't believe in religion, it is mind control. Don't believe in gender stereotypes, they are just there to suppress you. See how people are conditioned by fear and shame. Play a role and be conscious you play a role. Now let us dive deeper into nihilist philosophy, the third school of thought. What does nihilist philosophy has to offer in general and in regards to dealing with trauma? The main assumption, nihilism can encompass a spectrum of philosophical schools of thought, united by the fundamental aspiration to recognize no general truth. Derived from this are metaphysical, ethical, and logical or epistemological kinds of nihilism. The outlook is as following. Nihilistic schools perfect the Enlightenment's demand to question everything and to re-evaluate values. Their limit is the paradoxical situation that apodictic views themselves represent absolute truth that they actually reject. Now, what does nihilist philosophy has to offer in regards to trauma? There's one famous example of a nihilist philosopher, some say the nihilist philosopher, on dealing with trauma caused by dysfunctional families, so to speak, complex trauma or relational trauma. In his posthumous writings, Nietzsche addresses his contemporaries and describes why social relationships usually do not work, because it is not only individual failure. His nihilistic philosophy shows that the dysfunctional systems as such, marriage, parent-child relations, patriarchy, set people up to failure. His advice is, love marriages cannot succeed because passion per se is fleeting. Arranged marriages as well cannot succeed because they are the result of pure calculation. Parent-child relationships are mostly abusive. Conclusion: do not blame yourself for individual failures due to collective false norms. Comparison. When we compare the three schools of debate, we see that they have all produced important ideas for processing trauma. Stoic, Epicurean, and nihilistic views on trauma can be seen as a progressive reflection from event-related counseling to social counseling to systemic reflection. Methodology. Reframing, Stoic. Does it matter? Why and how does it matter? Are you any different from before? What are you existentially? Disidentifying, Epicurean. Can you distinguish between you and your social role? Can you play the role without losing the desire to do so? How can you have the greatest possible autarky? Rethinking normopathy. Do you understand how this normopathic society has driven you to this? How can you be healthy within a normopathic society? What has to change? Three schools of thinking in relation to trauma. Stoicism, the reframing of the traumatic event. This Stoic approach influenced epistemology and social psychology. Epicureanism, disidentifying from social norms. This Epicurean approach influenced sociology and cultural philosophy. Nihilism, recognizing the normopathy of society. Nihilism influenced and influences still political philosophy. Conclusion. The way in which trauma is dealt with has a long and varied philosophical history with a focus on at least three different schools of thought, even if it cannot be understood as therapy in the modern sense. Nevertheless, philosophical practice can serve as thought-provoking impulse, and in fact, some originally philosophical practices, such as reframing and disidentifying from societal norms, analyzing meta-systems and thoughts, are strongly represented in today's personal coaching. The nihilistic approach to dealing with trauma goes even further than this and, with the rethinking of normopathic systems and their values, poses a challenge to systemics as such. Thank you for your attention.